Good evening, everyone, and happy Sunday. Welcome to another installment of the Faith, Food, and Freedom series. I am so excited to be with you all again for another Sunday. As many of you know, the Black Church Food Security Network is in the middle of the Faith, Food, and Freedom Summer campaign. For the 95 days of summer, we are encouraging churches, houses of worship to connect back to agriculture through our three main goals. The first one is to promote gardening. We have a series on YouTube called Grocery Store Garden, where you all can learn how to regrow commonly purchased products and items from the grocery store at home. Our second goal of the campaign is to patronize Black farmers. We have an online Black farmer directory where you can type in your address and you can find Black farmers in your area to buy produce from. And our last goal is to practice emergency food preparedness. So within the next couple of weeks, we are going to launch a series where we will learn, me included, will learn how to turn peaches into jam. We'll learn how to turn cucumbers into pickles. So everyone stay tuned for that series. It's going to be insightful. It's going to be fun. So share the information with your networks. And if you are connected to a church, I encourage you to join our church covenant partnerships. We offer churches up to $1,000 to get their program started, as well as we offer other benefits like being an extension of your staff. So we walk you through the steps of planning your community garden, planning your farmers market, as well as sustaining it. So head over to our website, www.blackchurchfoodsecurity.net for more information. So let's get into the conversation. Y'all, this conversation is about to be so good. You know why I know it's going to be so good? Because everyone that is going to bless us today, we all have the same birthday. So you know what? My twin telepathy is telling me that this conversation is going to be good. So I'm going to bring on the host for this evening, Alexander Clementson, who is a field organizer with the Black Church Food Security Network, so he can introduce our speaker for today.
Hey everyone, this is Alex Clementson, again, a field organizer with Black Church Food Security Network. Excited to be with you all for another week. This week we are talking to Christopher Bradshaw. Chris is the founder and executive director of Dreaming Out Loud, whose mission is to create economic opportunity within marginalized communities while building healthy and equitable food systems. Since the onset of COVID-19, Dreaming Out Loud has partnered to distribute more than 20,000 emergency meals with restaurants, nonprofit partners, and folks such as World Central Kitchen. This includes more than 40,000 meals directly produced by the Dream Food Entrepreneurship Program participants, which have generated more than $340,000 in revenue for 5 Black women businesses, supporting 15 Black workers. Additionally, on Juneteenth, Dreaming Out Loud launched the Black Farm CSA, which is currently sources, packs, and distributes nearly 2,000 shares to 20 community-based sites across the district and PG County, creating 7 new community-based food jobs and supporting dozens of farmers across the region. And without further ado, I present to some and introduce to others, Chris Bradshaw. Thank you for being with us, Chris.
Man, thank you so much. I appreciate you all and the work that you do and having me on this Sunday.
So we wanted to have you on today because not only are you an expert, not only are you someone who's doing things in response to COVID-19, you've been doing work before this happened. Right. And so you are in the space and have a long history of doing work that intersects social justice and food justice. And Dreaming Out Loud, or DOL, as most folks who listen may know it, is this incredible organization. And you worked very hard with others to build to this point. So my first question to you would be, when did you make the initial connection between social justice and food justice?
Yeah, I think that first connection for me was made through a lot of conversations and work around access to land, to issues around food access within urban communities. And we have to acknowledge that Black folks, our existence is not just urban. So often we're associated with that term urban, but I'm from rural Tennessee, honestly. And so we get disconnected from our more rural cousins and our more rural connections. And so when I heard those terms at first around food justice, I didn't necessarily associate them with only the urban environment, because I've been around family members who had challenges around land access, maintaining access to land, had family members that are, LGBTQ plus. I have friends and family members across the spectrum of who deal with, justice issues, whether it's, being differently abled and not having access to what they need. So when food came about as an issue and a topic in my work life, it had already been a connection within my personal life. And so when we were talking about, at the time, I could rewind back to maybe 2010 or so. One of my current team members, Zachary Curtis, who's a brilliant organizer, at the time headed up Healthy Affordable Food for All, which was kind of an organizing network within a larger, nonprofit organization. And we talked about those connections and those conversations within those rooms within Bread for the City, the organization that hosted these convenings. We got to delve deeper into the intersections of race and class and gender and sexuality and, ability, justice across the spectrum. And for me, that was really beneficial, because while I had the, the undergraduate introduction while, attending Howard University, I got my graduate studies in these spaces with folks like Zachary and my team member, Violet King, having these deeper discussions, Violet being a mother and Violet, the intersections of justice across different spaces. And so for me, I was able to hear these conversations and step outside my comfort zone and ask questions and be able to be a fly on the wall in some instances as it relates to where these intersections touch, and to develop my own understanding, analysis, and also solutions to what should happen next.
So when you're talking about these solutions and these different analyses that you were going through and coming up with, how did this shape Dreaming Out Loud? Like, what was the trajectory of these conversations into this organization being created?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I feel like the name Dreaming Out Loud is, it's a nod to the striving towards something different and to something greater and better. And so, for us, it was looking at economic justice, which was a central theme that across the spectrum of our community, whether we were talking to folks in the faith-based community, whether we were talking to folks within the LGBTQ community or farmers, economic justice spanned the entire grouping, right? So I could be talking to folks who were, queer farmers, and their land access issues were undergirded, by lack of access to the capital to purchase land, or the lack of access to, the USDA loans to improve land and take next steps as farmers. I looked at my own family history, and I had sharecropping in my family background, and the economic issue crept into that conversation. And so you could see that at every intersection, economic justice was a major part of what was happening and what that connection was, and how our lack of economic wealth came from chattel slavery, came from Reconstruction, came from redlining, and you can trace those impacts down through history, and you can nearly identically tag that to specific policies that allowed for it to continue or block economic progress. And so no matter whom we were speaking of within our community, those connections tied back to land, it tied back to policy. And we looked at our present circumstances as organizers looking at the food issue, that those things were, you couldn't divorce them from those historical circumstances and all the policies and historical circumstances that had proceeded from, since we touched down, 400 years ago as Africans on this soil. So from 1619 on, you can trace why we face these food challenges, and they track back to economic challenges. And so we just wanted to be able to go a little bit deeper and discover and have a conversation about why those things were, and also how those challenges shaped our community responses to the circumstances, right? So we have folks that we respond to because they identify differently, because we have, traditions that were put upon us, because in order to maintain the status quo of, gender dominance or racial dominance, it had to replicate itself, and it had to filter into our community in order for us to continue to be the producers of their wealth, right? And so to unpack those layers and to unravel the layers of the onion takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of understanding and stepping to the side. And for me, as a cishet Black male leader of an organization, it takes for me to bring these issues to the fore, but also for me to step aside in terms of leadership and space and discussion around those issues.
You just dropped a lot of gems on us right there in that one question. And there's so many things I want to pull in. And you touched on the idea of history and the impacts of how we see these historical narratives of chattel enslavement, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, segregation, redlining, laws and policies that are tied directly in to the inability or lack of access to an intersecting form of social justice and food justice. How does that play as a backdrop for the DMV and DC area? What's some of that history we need to know about why Dreaming Out Loud is a response and a potential solution that you've worked so hard to create?
Yeah, I would say it's certainly a response. Jamestown, the geographical center point of the 1619 project, and as a landing point, is in Virginia. We talk about Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, and you circle back to those ancestors, and they are within this geographical region. You can hop in a car and you can get there within, a couple of hours. You can literally witness the ancestral lands upon which they farmed and fought for freedom. And we have friends who have endeavored upon those lands to begin to advance solutions that are connected to that history, but want to reframe it for a different generation that's looking for a different type of leadership and advancement. And so I would say that within the DMV, with that rich history, you can understand that the ways in which folks were dispossessed from land, the ways people were disconnected from the advantages provided by certain types of loan access and capital access, the ways in which people were segregated from the market economy. You know, we have these conversations today about what solutions are and what they aren't. And we're careful to say that our work is a part of advancing solutions, but is not the solution, right? You know, there's an article in the Washington Post that came out not too long ago, and it said that the United Nations had ruled and talked about that a solution of at least $14 trillion was owed to Black descendants of slaves in the United States as a part of reparations, right? So when we're talking about solutions, yes, I think that it is a beautiful thing. I think that it is as a progressive thing for us to be able to move pieces of our work forward that alleviate some of the strain of that lineage, right, of those policies, of those practices. But, you know, you can't bridge a circumstance where in the DMV, the racial wealth gap is something that we can't comprehend the actual real numbers and the gap between white wealth and Black wealth. In this region, it's 81 times, white wealth is 81 times that of Black wealth, right? So no matter how hard we work to create, you know, 7 to 10 Black food worker jobs paying living wages at $15 an hour, we're not bridging 400 years of history and 81 times the wealth with that $15 worth of hourly wage, right? So it's not necessarily a solution for us to be doing this work, but our work is valid and worth it to frame what the circumstances are to advance a broader policy solution. That means that in order to actually bridge that gap, which is traceable to the circumstances that lead us to not have access to healthy food, is that we need to continue that work to continue framing what is happening and why those solutions don't work. LLCs are not going to bridge the gap between 81 times white wealth being 81 times that of Black wealth in the district. These alleged SUSUs, which are Ponzi schemes that we keep seeing pop up. We'll talk about that later, what SUSUs are and how we can actually really develop collective wealth and economic activity, are not going to bridge that gap. It was done by government. And when we talk about this region, which is the seat of power of the most powerful and wealthiest nation in the world, you look back into the historiography around the way this nation perceives itself, right? And one of those major events is World War II, right? So World War II, we know the history. Many of the folks watching this broadcast know that they have men and women, mixtures within their family who fought and died, who came home, were lynched in their uniforms, denied the GI Bill, all of the above, right? At the same time that we came home and faced those circumstances, we have European nations of entire peoples who facing economic devastation, meaning they had their factories flattened by bombs. They had their farms evacuated because people couldn't farm them when, you know, there's a Panzer tank rolling across them. They were devastated economically. And for the United States to maintain its hegemony around the world, settled upon a solution, right? And it was the Marshall Plan. And that Marshall Plan reshaped the globe. This new economic system reshaped the globe. They had to bring France and Britain and the part of Germany that they controlled into this new economic system, because if they left it out there for these folks who were economically devastated, they knew that they would either turn to the east towards the Soviet Union, who was the goblin that the United States argued against for so long, or they would just languish, right? And so for so long, we have watched our folks languish, right? We've languished when they turned their domestic tanks and planes against us in places like Philadelphia in the MOVE movement, in Arkansas, in Lane, Arkansas, with Black farmers organizing in the Red Summer. What we've seen is nothing short of continual devastation. And so what we need is nothing short of a Marshall Plan that leverages the resources of nation states, of the collective, to make reparations, right? And so we want to talk about, yes, our work as an organization and connected organizations, but that it's framed by much larger circumstances that we can't bridge by, CSA shares and some of the progress we've been able to make, And so for me, that's where our work starts and how it's framed.
And so to your point about not only bridging the gap, finding reparations, and creating some sort of Marshall Plan and so many other things that need to take place in order to strike even some semblance of balance and some option of justice, I want to ask you, and I really want to run with the point you made of how does food production play a specific role in the opportunity for this idea of Black food sovereignty, land access, and then overall just wealth building and management in light of, as you said, the intersections, the space of acknowledging Indigenous folks, the space of acknowledging our family members who are in the LGBTQIA community, those with the ability of folks, and just so many other intersections, right? Like, how does that happen?
Right. So I think we have to be careful in the way that we frame what is happening within the notion of Black food sovereignty. There's no white food sovereignty, right? There's no white land sovereignty in the way that we think about it, right? So, you have things like if anybody out here is a football fan, you've heard of the team called the Oklahoma Sooners. It's a college football team. Their mascot is actually a Wagoneer. And before every home football game, they have a guy or a group of people that hop in a wagon and they ride around the football stadium. The Oklahoma Sooners are named after white folks from Oklahoma there was a great land giveaway in Oklahoma. And then they were permitted to come right onto this land and claim the land. But it started at a certain point, and the people who came before the time actually started, when you were allowed to claim the land, were called the Sooners, because they came too soon and they cheated the game, right? And so literally before this football game, they celebrate these white folks who came onto Native American land and rode their wagons on there and fought to the death as settler colonialists to establish themselves on this land. And so therefore they've cheated the game from the beginning. And so when we talk about Black food sovereignty, we have to talk about the full spectrum of things that are due and that are needed to establish the notion even of Black food sovereignty. But if we're talking about it honestly, white food sovereignty also does not exist, and neither does the land sovereignty without policy and we have to talk about the violence backed up by the state, right? So if we're talking about Black food sovereignty, for some it's rather magical, right? That we can pool our resources and then be able to escape some of the toil, some of the devaluation, the plunder that we've experienced previously, and that takes place outside of what I would call outside of the traditional marketplace, for a lack of better terms, right? Which I don't believe is entirely possible. You have a circumstance where white farmers, and there's this clip of Martin Luther King that we can all go find, where he's talking about, this is post Beyond Vietnam, he's talking about the Poor People's Campaign, and he was talking about the loans which white farmers received from the USDA. He's talking about the, those loans received to either mechanize or possess land, right? But he doesn't quite get to those market channels which white farmers were given domestically and internationally in order to be able to establish their alleged non-existent food sovereignty, right? So when we're talking about such large structural forces around food and agriculture, we cannot talk about Black food sovereignty if there are not some channels through which we can sell our wares and goods and have protections and advocacy and defense, right? It's not possible. Those things aren't real. And so, and it's particularly not real when we're talking about the type of wealth gaps that we experience within our community. And so we're very careful about talking about these aspects of the solutions or the work that we do, because they're very necessary. Because if the most well-resourced white farmer with Abrams tanks, F-15s and 16s, all that, has that behind them, the idea that we are, as activists and advocates and freedom fighters, without those things, the idea that we're just going to establish an oasis of Black food sovereignty is fantastical. It's not real. And so for us, that means that we advocate as a matter of public policy and as a matter of good business practice, the same access to the government resource channels, to the private resource channels that these other folks see. This year, Dreaming Out Loud launched the Black Farm CSA, which built upon our previous work as, running CSAs and farmers markets. And one of the key economic drivers right now behind that program is a relationship with DC Health, the Department of Health in the District of Columbia, which is a key driver in terms of contracting, so that we can access a market channel to be able to drive Black farmer produce into that CSA. And as of right now, we're packing nearly 2,000 shares per week of that community supported agriculture program. But it is a necessity that we're included within that program. Because if you look at that program as a district program, the food economy rotates around the metropolis, right, around DC. So you have farmers from Pennsylvania, from West Virginia, from Maryland, who all drive into various markets, either physically drive or, economically drive their production into the city. So if we're saying that white farmers have access to these channels, and if we look at it as, our food sovereignty does not include specific set-asides or access to these channels, we're then therefore not being realistic about how these white farmers and other farmers are surviving and accessing channels to be able to hold on to their land, to purchase new land, to invest, or what have you, that grows new wealth and supports their communities. It has to be full spectrum when we're talking about the ways in which we've been denied access and we've been shut out across American life, and in particular American economic life, and as it relates to farming and food.
And so, to everything you just enlightened us about, and the understanding of the idea of sovereignty needing to be intertwined with access to the channels that are currently in use for the means of survival and production, I want to ask you along the lines of Dreaming Out Loud's network development. What has it done in terms of reshaping the landscape of the DMV? What has that looked like, and why has that work become so critical as you're trying to navigate and create these new forms of food access and of food justice?
Right, absolutely. So I would say, in terms of reshaping things, there's a variety of ways that you can approach reframing or reshaping things. We are very much grassroots organizers. We are a team of farmers. I mentioned some of my team members who are farmers. I've grown up around food and putting seeds in the ground. But I would say in terms of formal channels, like I'm privileged to serve on the DC Food Policy Council. And so co-chairing the Urban Agriculture Working Group, that's a great platform to advocate for policies that not only impact the district, but take a look at best practices from Baltimore to Detroit to Cleveland, but also to advocate through channels where some of our policymakers beyond the district are listening, or where they hear things, right? So, I have conversations with members of the Montgomery Policy Food Council, the PG Food Equity Council, or Baltimore, through regional channels like the Metropolitan Regional Council of Governments, which convenes a lot of municipalities, where we can stand up in those rooms, bring new voices into those rooms, and say what is happening on the ground level that impacts Black farmers and food makers. And say that, yes, we need this stopgap policy, but structurally, what is happening is tied to reparations. What stopgap policy or infrastructure access policy or land access policy is necessary. We need to take these next steps if we want to get into the difficult conversations and not surface level fixes that only temporarily change or alter the circumstances, right? And so that's very important. Thought leadership is very important. I think it also takes grassroots leadership to put pressure on municipalities, whether it's, in DC. We have the city council, we have area neighborhood commissioners or ANCs that can put forward proclamations or solutions that can move things forward inch by inch. But those things need to continue to be built so that you can level up who you're reaching in terms of grassroots to grass top strategies, right? I think that as an organization, Dreaming Out Loud, we're well positioned as an organization located in the district. At the time of the passage or the near passage of the Farm Bill or the Urban Agriculture Bill within the Farm Bill, we've been privileged to be able to have conversations with senators and representatives, because it's literally just a metro ride down to the Capitol building to talk about what issues are impacting communities, right? It's another thing if you're in Mississippi and you got to fly up here and figure out all those different logistics and how can you get FaceTime. I can go to lunch with them, and so it takes, but the things that I may bring up at lunch are not informed by just the experience of folks within this 10 by 10 square mile, little diamond with a chunk taken out of it. It's informed by these conversations that are built in places like Bugs or Saffron and, up and down the Black Belt, right? And so it takes us having these conversations to make sure that no matter whom we're in front of, we understand what the broad spectrum of our community and collective needs are and what that big picture goal is, those macro level goals. And it has to be around those structural issues and changes that have to happen to shape things for our grandchildren and great grandchildren, not just impactful, for a community garden or a particular space on a given day.
And you just talked about family. We got a question from somebody who's watching right now, and it's, how do organizations work to build the capacity of small, generally retired family farms into productive, profitable small businesses? Is there anything you want to jump in with that?
Right. So I would say small family farms, there's often one individual, if you're lucky, that really wants to take on that legacy and that lineage. And I think that we need to make it easier for those folks to access what they need and to bring them into conversations like that you all have gathered over the course of this summer. It's critically important. I think it's really important to know that you're not alone. First of all, we all have those stories of folks in our family who were sharecroppers, who were farmers. And I think that there's more conversations to be had about how you can realistically take that small family business and plug it into things that are existing or that folks have on the verge of creating or on the precipice of really blowing up, and plugging those things into existing structures or circumstances. I'll go back to the Black Farm CSA. I mean, if there's a small retired family farm that has you're growing some kale and squash or what have you, right now, we would love your information and would love to get you plugged into this program that the DC government is partially paying for. I think that it's also important to have technical assistance and wisdom and knowledge sharing across, across spaces and generations. There's folks that will tell you, what they've learned. And so, your steps in capacity building might look different when you know what steps people have taken prior to. I think in terms of capacity, there's both infrastructure capacity, which, there's different USDA programs that are useful for that. I think there are nonprofit organizations helping bridge the gap in terms of building human capacity or infrastructure capacity. But I think a major part of either one of those things, you can add new people, you can add new hoop houses, but do you know where the seeds that you're putting in the ground are going when they come to fruit, when they become, the market item? And so that's another side of the capacity. We have to continue to have those conversations about, what has to happen between those three different sets of capacities for something to end up being an economic benefit. You got to have a hoop house with a trained staffer that knows the market, the conversation between the market access piece of the capacity and then, connect those dots and connect that chain for things to work on the ground, And so that's the thing we're trying to bridge.
So there are two other questions that came through, and we've only got a little time left. So I want to get all these across. I want to thank Michael Carter Jr. for asking that first question. And I want us to, if we have time, to circle back to the idea of the family lineage of sharecropping as a transition from chattel enslavement, and how that history and that knowledge might, transcend through who we are in our place and time. But we'll come back to that. The second question is, are there mentoring networks for emerging food policy leaders? Thank you, Brenda D. White. And there's a third question after that. So one more time, are there mentoring networks for emerging food policy leaders?
Yeah, I think there's emerging networks for emerging food policy leaders that are both formal and informal. I would say informally, I think it's in discussions like this. The National Black Food Justice Alliance convenes a lot of leaders and thought leaders around food policy and supply chain development, which is critically important for understanding what the steps in policy need to be for bridging the gaps between our folks and what they need in terms of market access and food access for the community. I think that there are some food policy programs. I know GW has a food policy program. Harvard has a food policy program. And I think that right now, folks that are interested in those, in those aspects of this work should look at, what's happening around food policy education. I think right now is the time for folks to push on those doors in terms of Black leaders and emerging leaders who want access to those educational and network channels, right? I know that there are a couple different fellowships. I think there's like a Nathan Cummings Fellowship that supports policy. There's a couple different, they're escaping me right now. There's a couple different fellowships that support developing policy leaders that need to happen. Internally, our team meetings are emerging leader policy development sessions because we bring those up. I think that Rooting DC and Bugs and things like that are also have workshops and resources where you can plug in and find out where you can develop your chops in that area.
Yeah. If you have more, go ahead. If not, I've got another question lined up and ready to go for you.
Yep. Okay.
So someone else has asked, how does food equity address the challenge of ultimately fresh vegetable produce demand versus farmer waster or low price because of lack of demand outside of community organizations looking to service certain communities? Again, this is from Michael Carter, Jr.
Right. So I think there's there's several pieces to that question. I think demand, first off, we're all, whether we like it or not, right now, presently, our work is framed by capitalism and supply and demand. We have right now an overwhelming, and particularly post-COVID, with the USDA's program that is meant allegedly to supply or to purchase from farmers into produce boxes that may also or required also to include meat and dairy from other farmers and ranchers. There's a flood of free produce. And we find that in our work. We work in Ward 7 and 8, really across the district, but concentrated in Ward 7 and 8, 95% Black communities, double-digit employment, and Prince George's County, which finds similar circumstances, and you have a situation where there's an influx and there's a flood of free produce, which devalues the products produced by our producers and our producers from our community. And it's a major problem. People want sustainable solutions that create jobs, but if everything's free and subsidized, no one ever has to make a market choice, right? No one ever has to make a choice, and it devalues what's available. You can have the world's most high quality, organically produced product right in front of your face, and you could reduce the price of said product below the market, but you'll never beat free 99. You never will beat free 99. And so if you're talking about a low-income consumer, if I'm going to take $1.50 or free's still going to win. And so you can't establish a market through which you're driving Black farmer, rancher, producer products, right? And you layer that on top of the fact that we have low wealth in our communities by the previously mentioned, $14 trillion worth of plunder over 400 years, then you don't have a viable marketplace to build sustainable community solutions, whether that's the big box grocery stores, which I am tired of discussing as a solution to our issues, or even the most value-aligned community cooperative, right? The most value-oriented community cooperative cannot survive without a market that wants to pay for the products within the four walls. So it doesn't matter what your values are if you cannot build some sort of sustainable model around that. And so with the flood of free produce, it gets harder and harder. So, you have to look at what channels you can use to survive and advance a conversation. But ultimately, it still comes back to the racial wealth gap and also the nonprofit and structural industrial complex that is constructed around keeping people poor and monetizing them.
And so with what you just said, we have a question that's asked, what are the best ways to grow food or start a garden during the pandemic? How do you partner with local groceries to purchase the food you grow? And this is from Cheryl Price. Shout out to my mom for asking this question. I know that's her.
Right. So thank you, Miss Cheryl. I appreciate you for raising a great son, first of all, and asking this question. What are the best ways to grow food and start a garden during the pandemic? I think you need to start where you're at. If you have a house with a backyard or an apartment building where you share space with other folks, those are the best places to start. You'll find your neighbors want to grow things with you and get to know you. I think it can help you reduce your grocery prices and have conversations just like the one we're having today. I think that it is amazing if you can find Black farmers who are into seed saving or values aligned seed saving companies where you can purchase your seeds. And you can find some really unique and different and amazing seeds of some cool stuff that you can grow. As it relates to getting small grocers to buy our stuff, I think there's several challenges along that line, right? Dreaming Out Loud is interesting in that we're both a farm and a food hub. So Violet King is our farm director. She leads a team of community members and young people who are growing food on our 2-acre farm and food hub at Kelly Miller. But we also are a food hub. We have within the organization as a food hub, we've trained I think it's 38 Black food makers over the past 3 years to be able to learn everything over the course of a 16-week program, from how to formalize your business, marketing, to scaling a recipe. And I think that for us, and looking at other food hubs, and we compete against white-led organizations and folks that have head starts 100 years in advance, right? So, you can look at, people that we work with, 4P Foods, Common Market, Fresh Farms. They have a longer list of suppliers, right? So if you're a restaurant or you're a small grocer and we come to you and say, hey, here's our list of suppliers, and there's 15 on ours and there's 55 or 155 on theirs, the choice and the range is going to be different, right? And so for us, it's very much relational in terms of finding folks that want to buy from the producers that we're connected to, whether that be the farmers or other types of Black food makers, so that they have a story to tell, so it moves off their shelf and moves from our supplier list on their shelf and off their shelf into the pockets into the grocery bags of the consumers. So I think it's really important for us to build those relationships, which also takes capacity to be able to take that time and build those relationships to be able to move products. we don't have as many farmers on our list because we have more farmers that have been driven off their land due to racial violence, had to give up land because of the racial wealth gap, or have not had market access prior to. And so they might still have the land, but they are not producing on that land because, you can make more money by going and get a job, with your engineering degree or law degree or working at the Walmart, right? Those are all economic questions that center around the same set of circumstances. So for us, it's very much relational. We have to come to those folks with a very different value proposition to say, get our folks' stuff onto your shelves. It does not lack the quality. We can deliver it on time, but let's tell a different story and present a different value proposition so that our folks can move.
And so just to answer, and not just to answer, but to respond to everything you just said and answer this last question, definitely want to shout out Dreaming Out Loud, your YouTube channel, for different things that you all have going on there. Then also shouting out Black Church Food Security Network's channel and the fact that we have, as you mentioned previously, the Growing series from earlier this summer, and from when coronavirus really became a focused impact. We did how to turn your grocery store produce into the gardens at your house. And as you mentioned, you can use the land that you have if you have any. You can use pot, you can use jars, you can use a variety of different products. So definitely wanted to throw those things out there. And we have a few minutes left. And so I'm going to pin us back to the idea of the knowledge of farming and history passed down even from the point of chattel enslavement, and moving even more so to the idea of sharecropping and the Great Migration, and how that has passed down through generations. And if there is knowledge that you find you have but can't necessarily explain, or there are folks you can tap into that know things but haven't been on the land in some time. And it may be just 2-3 minutes to answer that before we start wrapping up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those of us who are fortunate enough to have like our grandparents here are the first source of knowledge. I look back to my grandfather, who was born in Jacksonville, Georgia. Our family ended up partially in Jacksonville, Georgia, because they were in Rosewood, Florida, one of the scenes of one of the most notorious episodes of racial violence in America. He moved to Connecticut. He became, he worked at Pratt & Whitney, installing and building airplane or helicopter and airplane parts. He actually became a real estate entrepreneur. And so when I would go visit him from Tennessee, a little small town where I'm from, and go visit him in Connecticut, he would ride around in his little blue truck and fix what was broken, whether it was a lock or a pipe within his properties for his tenants. But when the when the day was done and he had finished all his tasks, for fun, he would go to a garden space and he would take me, and we would go harvest corn and tomatoes. And so for me, that like ancestral knowledge is what I rely upon. And even when you look at the seeds and things that he was putting in the ground, are tens of thousands of years worth of human history distilled down into a little bitty seed. And so for me, it's like looking at that broad span and sweep of history and understanding where you are on that dial, on that sundial, and what you need to do. And so those things that once were old are now becoming new again, right? And so we have folks that are looking at preserving things for pickles, and you and Siobhan were talking about this right before we started, preserving things as a way of returning to our food security, right? Those are traditional food security ways, but they could also be economic ways and means for, playing a role in bridging that gap at the micro level. We all have to have that conversation and keep the big picture things within our scope as it relates to reparations and the policies that will get us to where we want to be in terms of freedom and liberation, but we cannot neglect those incremental building blocks that are our experiences and our treasures from our past. Those are important. We have to rely upon them and continue to build upon them. They're valuable, invaluable, in fact.
And so a lot of folks watching right now, maybe pastors or church leaders or folks who are interested in food and food policy and justice. But if you could wave a magic wand and get faith-based institutions to line up and greater support of your work, what would you have us do right now? / what is the best way? I guess a continuation of that question. What's the best way to support you in the work you're doing right now? How can folks make donations?
Right. So right now, I would say that there are several different ways that the faith-based community can play a major role in advancing us towards the next steps and next phases as it relates to our 400-year movement towards liberation. I think that it's important for faith leaders and communities to play a role with their land access and purchasing power towards things like the Black Farm CSA. And I just saw that y'all launched the Black Church CSA, which can drive the church's purchasing power and land access into activities which are beneficial across the community and across the spectrum, which is a powerful component. Throughout our history, from organizing liberation newspapers through the fight for freeing us from chattel slavery, through Reconstruction, through the Civil Rights Movement, the communication network that the church represents has been invaluable in terms of delivering political messages about what needs to happen next, where we're going, and where we're at. So if we having a rally on Saturday at 2 p.m., there's no better network through which we can communicate that message through the churches, right? Strategically, as in terms of we're coming up on election season, getting that souls to the polls on Sundays, getting folks registered. Those are all parts of our history that aren't going anywhere, and they are our present and our future and will help to protect our future. We need that. I would also say that, on the policy side, as many folks as we can get in the room in spaces like the DC Food Policy Council, Reverend Andre Towner with the DC Baptist Convention, drives a lot of folks into spaces where we're having more voices in the room as it relates to our community food needs and translates to our community food and economic needs. But the more that we can have folks translating and relaying messages, the better we can be organized. Organization is key, and the church and the faith-based community is central to our organizing prospects for organizing a deeper impact and a better future.
I appreciate that answer. And I saw that we had your actual website flash across in a banner. Is that where folks can also make personal donations as well, outside of using church networks and outside of voting and some of the other things that you've already listed? Is this a good way for folks to help close that 400-year wealth gap by donating to this organization?
Yes, absolutely. So dreamingoutloud.org, that's our website, which we're in the process. COVID caught us in the midst of redeveloping our website. We had to respond to COVID and BLM protests and community food security, but dreamingoutloud.org is a great resource to find out more information. There you can track us on social media. You can sign up for our newsletter or donate. Our donation button on Network for Good is quite active. We love more. That helps us build capacity. As we're growing, we want to be able to tell our story better. We want to be able to support farmers and community food organizations through capacity building and sharing our experiences and building the team that can help, continue great work, like in partnership with the Black Church Food Security Network. And a donation is a great way to help that continue.
Well, Christopher Bradshaw, we appreciate you taking the time today and just imparting us with so much knowledge and so much richness. And as we come to the conclusion of this time together, Siobhan has a few other announcements that she would like to bring into the space. So we'd love for you to stick with us if you can and hear these announcements. And thank you, everybody, for listening and just being part of this moment today and for the Sundays to come.
Y'all, didn't I tell y'all that this conversation was going to be good? I want everyone right now to write one thing that really resonated with you throughout this conversation. And I want to encourage you to keep this conversation going. Follow DOLDC on all social media platforms. Support them as much as you can, in whatever capacity that you can support them. And I just want to close with connecting it back to the Faith, Food, and Freedom Summer Campaign. One of the things that the churches can do is connect back to agriculture. Let's use our land, let's use our assets to create a just and equitable food system. And you may be asking, how can you do that? So you can do that through our 3 goals. And our 3 goals is to promote gardening, patronize Black farmers, and practice emergency food storage. And this is our website. So head over to our website, blackchurchfoodsecurity.net, to find out more information about the Faith, Food, and Freedom Summer Campaign. And here is the video.
Food is used as a political weapon. But if you have a pig in it's been a blessing ever since for this one congregation. But then God.
So I don't know why the sound isn't working, but everyone, please head over to our website, blackchurchfoodsecurity.net, to receive more information. And I look forward to being in community and conversation with you all next week. Same time, 6 p.m., same place, Facebook Live or YouTube Live, the Black Church Food Security Network. Next week, we will have a conversation with Tallgrass Food Box. The entire team will be on talking about their operation. So I'll see y'all next week. Have a great night, have a great week, and stay blessed.